Hello and welcome to another episode of Gemstone Mine. I'm John.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Jake.
And we left you hanging last time when we got all the way through the Hour of Devastation gods in our whirlwind tour of all the gods throughout the history of magic. We're going to pick up today pretty much straight away with the next time God showed up in War of the Spark. I don't believe there's a lot of news that's out recently, at least until we get to our What's in Our Cart for the new Kaldheim set.
Yeah, the only thing that's changed since the last episode is that the full Kaldheim spoilers are out, so
we got a few more gods to talk about, that means. And since I don't think there's any games that we've played since the last time, why don't we just not keep our listeners waiting anymore and let's jump right into it. So when last we left off, we had finished talking about the Locust God, the Scarab God, and the Scorpion God, who had done in and killed our poor, sweet Amonkhet gods, and they showed up again in War of the Spark. Just like previous sets, we had a cycle of 5 monocolored gods, each one of these representing one of the 5 colors of magic. In white, we had God Eternal Alcatra. In blue, we had God Eternal Kefnet. In black, we had God Eternal Bantu. In red, we had Illhark the Raiseboar. And in green, we had God Eternal Ronas. Essentially, outside of red, the story was Nicole Bolas had killed all the gods and then eternalized them and brought them back as giant zombie gods. Creepy.
And I think Illhark is god native to Ravnica, maybe?
He is the Gruul god, yes.
Illhark is 3 and 2 red for a legendary creature. Boar God is a 6/6 with trample. He has the rider that all of the gods in this cycle do. When Illhark the Raiseboar dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it on top of its owner's library, third from the top. So which was a real pain in the butt to deal with during Limited.
That was pretty awful.
Yeah. And Illhark the Raiseboar's activated, or triggered ability, his triggered ability is whenever Illhark the Raiseboar attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Jake, did you ever run this in your Xenagos deck?
Yeah, I think he was even in the last version that survived. It's just, another sneak attack-ish variant that is attached to a 6/6 trampler. And kind of undercosted mana-wise for his stats, and everything I had in that deck had some sort of evasion, so flying or trample or both. So he fit the bill for all those.
Very true. It seemed to me like Illhark was kind of a more survivable but less powerful version of the red Elder Dinosaur legend. Which one was that, Alex? That was,
Itali?
Itali, yes, the one who just stole stuff from the top of everybody's library when it attacked. I mean, certainly unique with the sneak attack approach, which was kind of nice to see dipping back further in Red's color identity. Have you guys seen a lot of Illhark in the wild? It seems to be at least somewhat popular among this cycle of gods.
I only know one person that plays it, and that's actually our buddy Ryan, who has a Illhark deck.
I would like to see that deck again. That one was a lot of fun the few times I got to play against it.
Yeah, I've never run into a deck running Illhark as the commander, but I've seen him in the 99 for a few decks, just as like a value beat stick.
Yeah, it's a pretty good value at that, just getting you a free extra creature to attack every turn.
The real question is, though, is it as good as value as God Eternal Alcatra? Because we were just talking about it earlier. Just like she's not good. I play her for value. So
the God Eternal Alcatra. We'll very quickly go over her since we've had at least one episode about her so far. She is 3 and 2 white for a 3/6 legendary creature zombie god with double strike. She has that third from the top rule if she would die or exile. And her triggered ability is whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black zombie warrior creature token with vigilance. She was a beast in Limited. I don't think she's super strong in Commander. And the main reason I built her was I wanted to make a Teshar Ancestors Apostle deck, but I wanted it to be a lot fairer, so I could play it against people who were breaking out precons and that type of thing. And it does seem a lot fairer when the win condition is instead of winning on my turn, it's here's a giant army of zombies. Can you deal with it? You got a turn. Figure it out.
It's interesting to say a Teshar deck when it's actually just a Scrap Trawler deck.
Well, Teshar, Scrap Trawler, tomato.
One of the 19 that you have.
I think among the other God Eternals, though, the one that's had the biggest impact was God Eternal Kefnet, the blue God Eternal. So God Eternal Kefnet is 2 blue for a legendary creature zombie god. It is a 4/5 creature with flying. It has that third from the top rule if it would be exiled or destroyed. Its other triggered ability is you may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card and you may cast the copy. That copy cost 2 less to cast. Now, Jake, I believe you had mentioned that God Eternal Kefnet had probably had the biggest impact among these gods.
Yeah, anytime you get a repeatable spell copying engine that also discounts your spells, there's some broken stuff you can do with it. Specifically, in this case, extra turn cards that you recycle and put back on top of your library, and then you just get to take all the rest of the turns in the game. And usually, if you're the only one playing Magic, you have a pretty good chance of being able to win.
And extra turn spells taking 2 off the top, that's a pretty sizable discount.
Especially if you have a way of like scroll racking it back on top of your library, so that is the first card you draw every turn.
Also true. Okay, so are there any of the other God Eternals from War of the Spark who made a significant impact in Commander?
I wouldn't say significant impact, but God Eternal Bantu isn't half bad for her package in the right kind of deck. God Eternal Bantu is 5 mana, 3 generic and 2 black for a legendary creature zombie god. It has the same writer text as the other gods. Her evasiveness is menace, and when God Eternal Bantu enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of other permanents, then draw that many cards. So in Reanimator decks and things of that nature, God Eternal Bantu is it's definitely a solid package. And I used to run her in a Marin build that I had. It was enjoyable. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a splash or her own commander, but in the 99, I think she's good.
I really enjoyed God Eternal Bantu too. I have placed her in a number of decks that are trying to get value out of creatures and then play around in the graveyard, as black is wont to do. I kind of feel like God Eternal Bantu. The one thing I regret in my life is that I did not manage to build a deck that used both Flash and God Eternal Bantu for the ridiculousness of just continually recycling God Eternal Bantu out of the graveyard off of Flash to draw 1,000,000 cards for 2 mana. But it's probably for the best that Flash is gone and will stay gone.
Plus, she's a zombie crocodile god, which is pretty cool.
It is. And, since I'm the only one that brings up the lore of the story in here, she technically is the one that dealt the quote-unquote fatal blow to Nicol Bolas. So that's a thing. It's a bit of a claim to fame, even though she did just nibble him on the wrist.
Hey, you gotta do what you gotta do.
I mean, she used those crocodile jaws for some purpose.
She did good by the end. Well, I think if that's all that we want to say about the War of the Spark Gods, we can move right along to the next time we saw gods, surprising nobody, when we went back to Theros for Theros Beyond Death. And at least one of these 7 gods that came out in this set has made an impact across several formats.
Heliod is a 3 mana legendary creature god, 2 generic, 1 white for 5/5, indestructible, makes its return. That was absent through the Amonkhet and War of the Spark Gods. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod is not a creature, so it brings back the devotion mechanic from the original Theros with the same count as 5. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. And an added ability, for 1 and a white, another target creature gains lifelink until end of turn.
So how does Heliod's deck work?
So Heliod's deck works predominantly with getting one of 2 specific cards into play, either Triskelion or Walking Ballista. Walking Ballista and Triskelion both come into play with a number of +1/+1 counters, and you are able to remove them in order to deal damage. Using Heliod and Walking Ballista and or Triskelion and Heliod's ability to give another target creature lifelink until end of turn, as you remove a +1/+1 counter to deal damage to an opponent, the Heliod effect triggers, puts another +1/+1 counter on Walking Ballista and or Triskelion, and you just infinitely machine gun the table down. So apparently in this wide world of Magic, a god on Theros made best friends with machines. It's great.
I don't know, made friends with Daedalus. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me.
Heliod went so far as to put mono white on the map for CEDH, spawn his own Discord. So it's white was to.
And even outside of Commander, it sees play in, is it Pioneer or Historic? I forget which one is which. Is it both?
It's Pioneer on paper. It's Pioneer, and Ballista Heliod is a thing in Pioneer. Also and Heliod sees a lot of play in Brawl as well.
Okay.
The whole 3 mana make your creatures bigger with +1/+1 counters and lifelink and being a giant pain to remove is relatively strong.
And one of the largest strengths of the deck is that it can play through a lot of its own stacks pieces, which white has a lot of really good ones.
Plays through Rule of Law.
And it has 2 redundant combo pieces, both of which white is okay at getting. Not great, but okay. So it's pretty compact, pretty resilient, and yeah.
And sometimes if you just need to swing for 5 in the face, it's not that bad.
Also true. Now, would you guys believe me if I told you that the next most popular god from Theros Beyond Death is Clothus, God of Destiny?
Yes, I would.
So Clothus is the new Gruul god. It is 1, a red and a green for a legendary enchantment creature god, a 4/5 with indestructible. Its devotion count, being a multicolor god, has to be 7 for it to be a creature. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a land card, add red or green. Otherwise, you gain 2 life, and Clothus deals 2 damage to each opponent. Have you seen this deck in the wild, Alex?
Not in Commander, but when Theros came out, we were already a decent way into what is our COVID lifespan here. So I haven't actually.
Oh, it was. We were before COVID at that point. Absolutely, this was January.
I feel like COVID has been my entire life.
Yeah.
You're right. Time has no meaning
COVID
anymore.
is as long as the Eldrazi winter was in Modern. So, it feels like it's been going on forever. The only Clothus decks I've run across have been through Brawl.
And what does it do in Brawl? Because I'm not sure how you would build around this one, honestly.
It does, you don't necessarily build around it. You build it for the colors. And then you just take advantage of its effects. Realistically, it is just a 4/5 beater for 3 that in Gruul is relatively easy to turn into a creature, because green and red just has creatures you want to put in the battlefield and just swing with. But it's just more incremental value, either just hitting someone for 2 every turn or generating mana. So you don't necessarily build around it. She's like, I'm going to put this in play. If I swing with her, great, but she's just going to either be a net positive mana for me, or it's just going to, mosquito bite my opponent to death.
All right, fair.
And if you can't get rid of it, it's just there. So.
Also fair. All right, and then our next most popular god from Theros Beyond Death is, once again, Perseus. And Perseus is 4 and a red for a legendary enchantment creature god. It is a 7/6 with indestructible. Being a monocolored god, its devotion count has to be 5 to become a creature. Other creatures you control have haste, always a powerful effect. Its activated ability is 2 and a red. You may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. It obviously has haste based on the static ability, then sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So, another sneak attack.
Slightly more expensive sneak attack, but it can hit. Yeah, so it is limited to red creatures and artifact creatures.
So usually probably going to be more at the head of its own deck than seeing play in somebody else's deck.
I don't think in Brawl, Commander, or any other format I've actually ever encountered Perseus, either as the Commander or the 99.
Do you think it might suffer from the fact that it's aping a lot of what, like, Illhark the Raiseboar had done before it, or even before that, Itali Primal Storm?
I think it's the sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step as compared to return it to your hand. That is more in the way of sneak attack, but in terms of what Magic is currently and what Illhark does and all that, sacrificing as compared to getting it back to repeat just seems a bit more of a drawback, at least from the games and where I would have encountered it in the past year or so.
Okay. Are there any of the other gods from Theros Beyond Death that we really want to sit down and talk about? Or do we want to start digging into these new gods from Kaldheim?
I'll give it a head nod to Thassa Deep Dwelling. She is a 4-mana legendary creature, enchantment creature god for 6/5, indestructible, devotion to 5, just like the monocolor gods. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 other target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under your control. And then for 4 mana, tap another target creature. I have not encountered it in Commander. I have encountered it more times than I care to count in Brawl. Before it was banned, and when Historic Brawl is available, Thassa's Deep Dwelling and Agent of Treachery was very, 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 very annoying. But that's Brawl.
That sounds obnoxious.
So having actually in the past run I'm just going to take your cards and win with them deck that we took to that Grand Prix, being on the receiving end of that, it is really annoying. I feel bad for building that deck now.
Not that bad, though.
That's all I got on Thassa. But I mean, it's an interesting effect that she can do. And there's a lot that, the bounce effects are prevalent in Magic. I mean, not as well known as Brago or, to an extent Urian, but they are effects that are out there. And her, once again, being indestructible makes it to where if you resolve this, it's relatively difficult to get rid of. So you will always have that element of your deck in place, where cards like Brago or Urion can be removed relatively easily.
Jake, are there any of the other gods from Theros Beyond Death you want to touch on before we get to Kaldheim?
I think the Athreos mechanic is kind of neat. Basically, at the beginning of your end step, you put a coin counter on another creature, and whenever a creature with a coin counter on it dies or is put into exile, you turn that creature to the battlefield under your control. I don't know, I think that's a neat mechanic. I don't think it is strong enough to justify it, especially because for some reason Athreus cost 6 mana. He's 4 white-black for being a 4/7. A lot of the times the Theros gods are undercosted for their stats and abilities because they have the devotion mechanic to actually turn them into creatures. But for some reason he's 6 mana, and the effect I don't think is quite splashy enough, but I do think it is cool.
I did try to build this deck unsuccessfully, and I kind of reached the conclusion that you did. Having to wait essentially 6 turns before I could start doing what the deck wants to do, those expensive commanders really need to make a big impact.
But beyond that, I think I'm ready to move to Kaldheim with our, 12 new gods? Well, we get 2 in each color, and then we get a fancy green/5 color, and then a certain returning character coming back to make life a little tricky.
But we also have a sneaky Sultai one in there too.
Oh yeah, I forgot about him.
So among the gods that we see Halvar, god of battle, is a mono white god. We have Radin, god of the worthy, another mono white god. Among mono blue, we have Ulrund, god of the cosmos, and Kosima, god of voyage. In mono black, we have Egon, god of death. We have Turgrid, god of fright. Among mono red, we have Berkey, god of storytelling, and Turoffs, god of fury. Among mono green, we have Kolvori, god of kinship. Then, in Rakdos, we have Valkmira, god of lies. In Sultai, we have Yorn, god of winter. And in 5-color, we have Esika, god of the tree. So where should we start talking about these? Because these are a little bit previewy. These are not even out yet, and we don't know what's going to come out of them. But I know, Alex, you had one of these that you definitely wanted to talk about in mono white.
Yes, I have an Akiri, the new Akiri, where it actually makes the artifact equipment a little better. And to that extent, Halvar, god of battle, seems like it'd fit right in there. Halvar is 4 mana, 2 generic, and 2 white for a legendary creature god. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike. At the beginning of each combat, you may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature you control to target creature you control. And he is a 4/4. And he's nifty because a lot of what Boris equipment decks want to do is go ahead and move equipment around. The problem is a lot of the equipment that we want, the ones that are splashy make effects, are a bit pricier. His ability at the beginning of combat to move them around free of charge from a creature you control to another one is really strong. The downside of it is it has to be attached to an existing creature already. So you can't just play an expensive artifact equipment down on the field and then have Halvar attach it. It has to be attached in the first place.
So it doesn't get to cheat that the initial equip cost.
Correct. But it does have the ability to move it, moving into a phase, which makes it a little harder to interact with. Now, the gods of Kaldheim are a bit unique, where the Theros gods were indestructible, the War of the Spark gods had a returning mechanic, the Kaldheim gods are all modal dual face cards. So since Halvar seems relatively strong on an equipment or aura deck, it is only fitting that his flip side is Sword of the Realms, which is a 2 mana, 1 and a white, legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has vigilance. Whenever a equipped creature dies, return to its owner's hand with an equip cost of 1 and a white. Tying into the whole equipment theme of it, one of the weaknesses of Boros or equipment decks in general is if the creature you have attached everything to dies, you're left with a bunch of equipment on the battlefield, no creature, and then you're pretty much stuck. It's one of the weaknesses of Voltron. Having Sword of the Realms equipped to it means that even if you suit up your creature for a big swing and it gets taken out, that creature is going to return to your hand when it dies. So you'll be able to play it next turn, re-equip it, and hopefully be able to connect with its damage.
Now, since you're playing in a Boros equipment type deck, do you think that the decision between playing Halvar on the front half as a creature versus playing it as an equipment on the back half, is that a meaningful decision for your deck? Or is there one side that's just definitely better?
I think for now, at first blush, I want to say it's about even. Because creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike is a relatively powerful late game effect, especially if you've got board presence. Double strike is, at least from observation, I think one of the harder abilities to trigger on creatures because it's so powerful, when it does happen. So if I've got a board of beaters on the field and I play Halvar as a creature, well then there's a chance where an attack that would not be lethal now is. And his ability to move equipment around is nothing to sneeze at either. It's earlier on, if I'm playing the Sword of the Realms earlier on in the game, I've got, hey, something I want to protect, something I want to sit there and try and build up to, especially if any creature has value to it, then I'll play Sword, as it'll be able to at least keep that creature coming back, and I'll make it so, if anything, I could use it as a blocker, it dies, I replay it, I re-equip it, and I at least have something to block with until I'm able to, progress my board state.
Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. Our other mono-white god was apparently the answer, quote-unquote, that Wizards of the Coast feels that we need to Snowlands. There's been a lot of discussion recently as to whether or not Snowlands are invalidating basic lands in general, where in formats like Modern, you are giving up percentage points by not playing Snowlands because it tells your opponent that you are not playing snow creatures like Icefang Coatl. The hate bear that they gave us in the command zone is Rhydain, God of the Worthy. 2 and a white for a 2/3 legendary creature god with flying and vigilance, so not bad stats overall. Snowlands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost of 4 or greater cost 2 more to cast. So a little bit of aping from Gadok Teague there. Then, her back half, she is an artifact that is Valkmira, Protector's Shield, 3 and a white for a legendary artifact. It reads, if a source an opponent control would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent one of that damage. Whenever you or another permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. Is this the answer to Snow in Modern? I don't know. I've played exactly like 6 games of Modern. I don't feel qualified to speak for that. Are any of you guys interested in seeing this in the command zone of one of your decks? I'm honestly not too psyched for it. I'm not too psyched for it in the 99.
I have no intention of doing it as a commander, but I think it might have some use in the 99 as a hate bear.
3 mana for a hate bear is a lot.
It is a very, very niche include, but it does tax certain key spells like, Ad Nauseam, Peer into the Abyss, Force of Will. There's not a ton that it hits, like in the more streamlined decks, like either Flux Reservoir, but a lot of people have moved off of that.
Down below those, I guess it will tax the most of the wrath effects that you're going to be seeing, other than probably Toxic Deluge.
Yeah, and Fire Covenant, but I don't know. And on the backside, I guess there's a couple of decks that win through pinging. Like, I know there were some Corval decks with Mayhem Devil loops, and
don't forget about Snoop Troop. With Snoop and Kiki Jiki and Mog Fanatic, and
I guess there's still like 1 or 2 decks out there that play Squirrel Farm as a win, and that would shut some of those off. But I don't know. It's super narrow. I don't know if it would make the cut.
Maybe it could be a pretty decent meta choice if you got a lot of people who are your deck. You just really want to protect your board and not let people wrath on a reasonable clock. I don't know.
I mean, it stops Heliod, doesn't it?
It does stop Heliod. Again, I don't run into Heliod enough to say that I need to have this in my life.
It's taking a different angle here. On any of the decks that run hate bears and are running white, more than likely also involve Timna the Weaver, it is a relatively early hate bear that has evasion.
Also, that's true. And it does have vigilance, and, Alex?
It blocks Timna.
F and
A. It can both attack and draw a card for your Timna and block their Timna.
All right, maybe I'm up on it a little bit. I still think this is probably one of the ones I am lowest on among this group, though. Why don't we move on to the blue gods? And we have 2 of those, and both of these are true mono blue gods. I'd like to talk a little bit about Kosima, God of Voyage. So this is 2 and a blue for a legendary creature god. It is a 2/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile Kosima. If you do, it gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Kosima is exiled, you may put a voyage counter on it. If you don't, return Kosima to the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and draw X cards, where X is the number of voyage counters on it.
This is one of those cards where the wording is like super obtuse and you have to read it 2 or 3 times, but once you get what it does, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. They just have to use weird magic language to convey it.
Exactly. You go on a journey, you discover new lands, and then Kosima comes back with a lot of knowledge for you and a lot stronger for it. +1/+1 counters, drawing cards, seems good. And like all of the Kaldheim gods, on the backside we have a different type of thing altogether. We have, I guess this is Kosima's ship, the Omen Keel. 1 and a blue for a legendary creature, or legendary artifact vehicle. It is a 3/3 with a crew cost of 1. Whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. So we have our Viking Raiders.
Yeah, just both sides of this card are like a home run in terms of translating flavor into card mechanics.
I've got to agree. It's really cool to see this. I don't know if it's super strong. I mean, it ramps in a way that mono blue often has a trouble doing as a color. I'm just not sure how particularly powerful it is, particularly when you can't have Kosima in exile and also have the Omen Keel in play without jumping through a lot of hoops.
Yeah, that's one thing that's nice about these cards for other constructed formats. They are legendary, so a lot of the times drawing multiples is a bad thing, but they do have a lot of synergy often for the front and back halves. So it's kind of like, what was that future sight mechanic? Grandeur, maybe?
Oh, grandeur, yes. So if you had the legendary creature in play and you drew a copy of it, you could, I think, reveal
I think you can discard it for an effect or something along those lines. But it's just a way to make having
super weird.
Yeah, it makes having multiple legendaries not a downside.
And I think that this is a much stronger approach for 60 and 4 formats overall. Our other mono blue god, Alex, do you have any interest in Alrund, god of the cosmos? Well, Alrund is 3 and 2 blue for a legendary creature god. He is a 1/1. Alrund gets +1/+1 for each card in your hand, and each Foretell card you own in exile. Foretell being one of the mechanics out of Kaldheim. We'll talk to that a little bit more at a future date, but essentially you get to pay to exile a card with Foretell face down, and then on a later turn you can cast it for its Foretell cost. A little bit like Morph, a little bit like Suspend. The rest of the card reads, at the beginning of your end step, choose a card type, then reveal the top 2 cards of your library. Put all cards of the chosen type into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So 5 mana for a slow selective draw, which does come into effect at the end of turn. It's not bad, but not super attractive, I guess. Then the other side looks like it will be one of Odin's ravens, one of Alrund's birds. We have Hakka, the Whispering Raven. 1 and a blue for a legendary creature bird. It is a 2/3 with flying. Whenever Hakka, Whispering Raven, deals combat damage to a player, return it to its owner's hand, then scry 2. So the bird flies out, connects, gives you a scry to set up your friend Alrund, who can then use that information you scried to presumably get better cards. I mean, it's a cool design, but just doesn't really appeal to me, I guess, in Commander.
It is interesting how of the flip side cards, it gives it a way to come back to your hand relatively easily, so long as you can connect and doesn't get killed. So being able to constantly play the card back and forth between sides is pretty interesting.
That is true. Well, why don't we get on to the color that I know Jake has at least one card he wants to talk about. Jake, why don't you just take it away with your new best friend?
So I assume you're talking about Turgrid, God of Fright, who is 3 generic and 2 black for a 4/5 with a menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And on the reverse side, it is Turgrid's Lantern, a legendary artifact for 3 generic and a black. You can tap it, and target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And for 3 generic and a black, you can untap Turgrid's Lantern. So this is combining 2 of the pretty common black archetypes of like sacrifice and removal and discard into a single potential commander, which is kind of fun. And on the backside, it actually is an infinite mana outlet in your command zone to win you the game. Unfortunately, black's not the best. Like mono black, infinite mana. I was looking at some of those combos, and I'm like, man, this is awkward. They're like 3-4 card combos that use some pretty janky cards, but it exists, so that is cool.
I've heard a lot of people saying that they feel like Turgrid is just probably the most salt-inducing commander. I don't know if that's the case, because unlike a lot of other Staxy type commanders, Turgrid is probably going to win the game pretty quickly after it establishes that soft lock of a Grave Pact effect or like a recurring discard outlet. And my oh my has the cost on It That Betrays slimmed way, way down.
It, like a lot of these niche legends are, it makes a lot of the older cards that have some limited uses kind of stand out. Like there's pox and smallpox, which become much better when you just take everybody's stuff instead of making them sacrifice them.
Also true. Also true. So are you going to try to build this one? Is it going to go into another deck of yours? Have you decided yet?
So I've made a list, and I also stuck it in the 99 of another list for Nath, but I don't know if I'm going to play either of those, because I am running into the issue where they're not really beefy enough to keep up with actual CEDH decks, and then I also don't want to get punched by people when I'm sitting down to play a, quote-unquote friendly game of Magic.
The other issue I see with this one in Alex QR, I can't wait for quarantine times to be over, is this... Jake, how many infinite tokens do you have?
How many?
Do you have enough to be able to, like, when you take 7 cards from each player every turn, to...
I mean, I did buy 3 packs of those dry erase cards, so I do. It would just involve lots of doodling on them with my markers that I have.
I mean, it sounds to me like you need to train your daughter to begin to become a Magic artist.
It is one of those cards that is less webcam friendly, but we do kind of play with some of those cards already. Like Paco is a little awkward like that, and Praetor's Grasp, and we make it work. Yeah.
It will be good to be able to enjoy these cards in person again someday. But before we can enjoy anything in person, we have to survive Egon, God of Death. So I'll take Egon just because I love me some Ghostbusters, and it's really weird seeing Harold Ramis carrying a scythe and walking around and looking super thin with a faux hawk. So Egon, God of Death, is 2 and a black for a 6/6 legendary creature god with Death Touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, sacrifice Egon and draw a card. The alternate side is an artifact, Throne of Death, for a single black mana. At the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card. 2 and a black, tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, draw a card. So the front side kind of harkens back to the classic, like, demon archetype from Black's history in Magic, where you had an undercosted, overstated beater who had some terrible cost you had to pay every turn, like all the way back to Lord of the Pit. This cost does not seem super hard to pay in Commander, but the advantage is you're only getting a 6/6 Death Touch with no other real form of evasion. I actually think the opposite side of it, Throne of Death, for a single black mana, it's in mono black especially, essentially a source of extra card draw to set up your graveyard for reanimation shenanigans. And then on turn, once you have 3 mana, you are activating it to probably draw a card if you need to. I don't have a home for this. Maybe this winds up in, like, my Sir Conrad the Grim deck. I can see the interest in having this in the command zone, but I don't think it's going to go into my command zone anytime soon.
I also just find it amusing that it's a 6/6 with Death Touch. Like, they do this every once in a while where they have a giant creature and they're like, oh yeah, and we'll give it Death Touch because, it usually won't win a combat anyway.
Isn't that like a flavor stat or something they call it?
Yeah, at that point.
I wonder if there's anything there that can be done with his first ability and using things like Squee or Mist Hologriffin, cards that you can play from exile, where it's like, okay, well, you play it, you sacrifice it, goes to the graveyard, you exile, you replay it just to keep Egon around. That sounds entirely convoluted, but I wonder if there's something there.
But when you're at that point, you don't even have him as your commander. So at that point, it's just an overstated 6/6
Why would you want?
in your
Why would you want
99.
to?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's interesting. I can't say it's bad. It is interesting. Just I'm not sure if it speaks to me. Alex, we've talked about the other two black gods. Why don't you take on this happy-looking fellow Valky, who I'm sure is nothing but sunshine and friendship?
All right. Valkey, God of Lies, is a 2 mana, 1 and a black, legendary creature god that's 2/1. When Valkey enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card they revealed this way until Valkey leaves the battlefield. For X, choose a creature card and exile with Valkey with converted at cost X. Valkey becomes a copy of that card. So not too much. I mean, it's interesting there. It's kind of a pseudo Lazov-esque effect where it becomes a
Which
copy
is
of that.
cool, and as we see, it's going to be in different colors because...
When you flip it over, to no one's surprise, you end up with Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. He is a legendary planeswalker, Tybalt. 5 and a mountain and a swamp with a starting loyalty of 5. As Tybalt enters the battlefield, you get an emblem with you may play cards exile with Tybalt Cosmic Imposter, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. His +2 ability is exile the top card of each player's library. For -3, he may exile target artifact and or creature, and -8, exile all cards from all graveyards, add 3 red mana to your mana.
This is really cool, and I think this is probably the neatest design of all of the gods coming out of Kaldheim. Both halves of it are doing something unique in Rakdos in terms of kind of doing the Gonti or Lazov thing. And the backside is also really well designed, where it's the emblem which lets you cast cards that Tybalt has exiled. I have to look at the release notes to see if Tybalt also can cast cards that Valkey had exiled before. I just don't know how that will work. It is super interesting. I just have 3 Rakdos decks already, and he doesn't do it for me like Grevin or Scrapdos does.
I just wish that he had a slightly lower casting cost on the Tybalt side, because a 7 CMC commander is rough, especially if you're casting his front half first. You're immediately bumping up to 9 CMC to cast your commander.
And you could also just miss with Valkey, because it looks at opponents' hands. I mean, there's a chance where you play it, and no opponents have creatures, and then you're kind of just left with a 2/1. And then a 9-mana Planeswalker.
Looking over the release notes, it does not look like you can use Tybalt to later look at cards that were exiled by Valkey and vice versa. They are considered 2 separate objects by the game, so no synergy there. They just kind of are working in an interesting way. Well, we're almost to Alex's favorite color now. Since we talked about Rakdos, we'll get on to red.
Yeah, I'm a little excited about Berkey, God of Storytelling. She is a 3/3 for 2 generic and a red. Whenever you cast a spell, add red until end of turn.
Wow.
Yeah, right there. But it continues until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps end and phases end.
Wow.
And then there's even more, but it really doesn't matter. Creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. Boast is one of the new Kaldheim mechanics. Whatever. We'll get to that later. The back half of Berkey is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, a legendary artifact for 4 generic and a red. Discard a card. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. Also,
wow.
Yeah, they're continuing the trend of printing some pretty bonkers stuff for red. This lets you, on the front half, basically get a cost discount on all your spells. Makes stormy turns go a whole lot better. Helps, chain a bunch of stuff together. Back half gives you a pretty great outlet for large hands that just don't quite get there. There's a lot of interesting things for Berkey in the 99 that I haven't even really looked at yet, but I am very excited to grab a copy of this and start messing with it.
Oh, especially so even just the regular art's pretty amazing on this, but the storybook or the metal or the myth art is also bonkers good.
Yeah, I really dig whatever the heck this is, the other frame that they're doing for the
The showcase
yes,
frame.
showcase is the word. I am
frame.
really enjoying the showcase frame for the Kaldheim cards.
I have to say, though, Eric DeChamps just really killed it with the regular art on this one, because it does look like she's just like, okay, y'all got to hear this. I got a story. Just like everything about the posing, the facial expression, it just looks like somebody excited to tell a story, and I am in for it. Oh, and the card is nuts.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, both your Torbrand deck and John and Minotaur Neheb deck, Jake, can both benefit from this. John for the Berkey side, and then hopefully the backside of Berkey can make Jake's turns go faster.
It'll be much more consistent when we get killed by an angry Minotaur and all the fire he brings. This card is probably going to do some stuff in CDH. This card is probably going to do stuff at regular commander tables. Good job, Red. Now our other mono red god, if there's nothing else. Alex, do you want to tell us about Turoff?
Turoff, God of Fury, is 4 mana, 2 generic, and 2 red for a legendary creature god. He is a 5/4 with trample. Whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Turoff deals damage equal to that excess to any target other than that permanent.
So essentially, you have better trample on all of your non-combat damage. The easiest way to think of it.
And then on the back of Turoff, God of Fury, we have Turoffs Hammer. It is a legendary artifact equipment for 2 mana, 1 and a red. Equipped creature has 1 red unattached Turoffs Hammer. It deals 3 damage to any target. Return Turoffs Hammer to its owner's hand. Equipped creature gets +3/+0 as long as it's legendary, with an equipped cost of 1 and a red. It's recurring theme here.
Giving everything that's not combat damage trample is just kind of awesome. Putting it on a very efficient body is awesome. And then having the back half essentially be an equipment version of Hammer of Bogarden from my days of terrible 60-4 kitchen table magic is also extra awesome.
I did see somebody say that the back half looks like a really busted card from, like, 90s Magic.
Mm-hmm. And, yeah, I just love it.
I know. It's an interesting effect. And for 2 mana it's reasonably costed, but for this effect, I kind of maybe almost want Sunforger in my Akiri deck. I'm going to definitely try it out. I don't know how often the front half is going to take precedence over the back half, but I'm definitely looking to pick up a copy and at least see how it plays out.
The front half looks potentially insane in Torbrand, though I will deal 3 damage to your 1/1 with a Pyrohemia effect. You will take 3 damage from it, and then for that 1 mana, 2 damage will trample over, which will then be increased to 4, meaning I have dealt 7 damage to you for 1 red mana.
It's interesting with effects like Starve Extinction.
What's I'm blanking on the name. The 13 damage to every creature.
Blasphemous Act.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see a deck with like Starve Extinction, Blasphemous Act like offense. It's like you've got a bunch of 1/1s. I'm gonna Starve Extinction. You take 19 extra damage per.
I don't care if it's gonna be good. It's gonna be in the 99 of Torbrand. Well, we've now gotten through red. Alex, you've been waiting 2 weeks now. We're on to the new green gods. Where should we start? You tell us.
This is going to sound blasphemous, but of the 3 new green gods, I'm not really excited for any of them, which sounds horrible. I know. I know. But we were talking earlier about one of the green gods that I think would... a couple keywords would make it stronger, so I guess we'll start there. With just Armano green, Kolvori, God of Kinship. She is a legendary creature god, 2/4 for 4 mana, 2 generic and 2 green. As long as you control 3 or more legendary creatures, Kolvori gets +4/+2 and has vigilance. So she turns into a 6/6 if you've got a nice cadre of legendary creatures. Additionally, she has an active availability for 1 and a green. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in any random order. The front end seems like she'd be an interesting addition to Sisay, maybe? I don't play Sisay. I know you had her with some secret commanders, but I don't have enough experience to say it would be good there. Her flip side, though, is the Ringheart Crest. It is a legendary artifact for 2 mana, 1 and a green. As Ringheart Crest enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Tap, add 1 green, spend this mana only to cast creature spell of the chosen type, or legendary creature. If that said, make that spell uncounterable as well as the rest of its text, I would be on board with this simply for that side. But if we talked about that'd be a bit too powerful.
What if? Yeah, it probably would be too powerful. What if it cost 3 mana, like two and a green for the artifact side? Would you still be on it for that cost?
I'd still be on it for that cost, I think. Only because legendary as a keyword has become more prevalent in the past couple of years of Magic than it was previously. So in the right deck, it says, hey, the majority of my creatures can't be countered. Also, my commanders can't be countered. And it is still a mana rock. It may not be the most efficient mana rock, but it is still a mana rock. You can't accelerate it out. I would definitely be more interested if it was 3 mana and had the uncountable clause in there as well.
I think both sides of this are going to be something that the handful of Recce History of Kamigawa decks out there are looking for with mono green enchantment, mono green legendary tribal. Otherwise, yeah, I don't really have a real big home for this one. I don't think I'm too terribly interested in it.
If it was legendary permanents as compared to just creatures, where you could take advantage of like lands and stuff like that, that would also make it a bit more interesting on the creature side of it. But kinship creatures, I get the flavor of it. It would just be easier to activate if you could count legendary lands as well.
Also true. So Jake, among our last 2 gods to talk about, which one of these do you want to take? Which one interests you more?
I will go ahead and talk about Jorn, I don't know, God of Winter. So he's a 3/3 for 2 generic and a green, legendary snow creature god. Whenever Jorn attacks, untap each snow permanent you control.
That's a pretty powerful front side.
And on the back side, it is Kaldheim the Rime Staff, a legendary snow artifact for 1 generic, blue, and black. You can tap it, and then you may play target snow permanent card from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tap. So we've got a Sultai Snow Matters commander option.
Yeah, as worried as people are about snow in Modern and other 60 and 4 formats, I'm not sure how worried we are about it taking over Commander. I'm not sure if there's even enough support, really, to make this work. It's cool.
Yeah, I don't think there's that many notable snow cards like Arkham's Astrolabe, but that's...
So in black, you do get things like that I run in Greven. So you get Dead of Winter, which is a really efficient sweeper spell based on the number of snow permanents you control. You get Whispering Wisps, which is an even cheaper Pestilence effect, but you have to pay for it with snow-covered swamp mana. In green,
yeah, but Jorn...
Into the North supports it.
Like these are all things that Jorn's not really doing anything with. Like you could run these cards in a normal deck without Jorn. What
about the front half of just you get to untap a bunch of lands?
Yeah, that's pretty much all he does in this format, I think. If you attack, get your snow lands untapped, but you're tying that into attacking with a 3/3, and you can't really double up your mana use. Like you can use it all in your first main and then use your mana again in your second main, but you're not doubling the mana available for like one phase, if that makes sense. I don't know. It might have some kind of use.
That's kind of where I'm coming down on it too. Which I think takes us to, once again, just the showcase art's bonkers. And the artist for the showcase art, I just have to read this, illustrated by Wolf Skull Jack.
Yeah, I think they did all of the showcase art by, they got some kind of artist type to do these. I think they all did like metal album covers or something.
Yeah, they still all look great. Well, why don't we get on to our last god in that case, and we have Isika, God of the Tree. It is a mono-green god masquerading as a 5-color legend on the other side. So Isika, God of the Tree, is 1 green for a legendary creature god. It is a 1/4 with Vigilance. Isika taps to add 1 mana of any color. Other legendary creatures you control have Vigilance and tap, add 1 mana of any color, so turns all of your legends into Birds of Paradise. Then on the alternate side, we have the Prismatic Bridge, which costs white, blue, black, red, green, that is WUBRG, for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So a really slow, if powerful, enchantment on the backside of this that you can pull out of your command zone, which is pretty cool. A kind of late to get to. Like for 3 mana, I want a little bit more than just a Bird of Paradise, but not bad, as it also, if you're in a Legendary Matters deck, turns your other legendary creatures into mana dorks and gives them Vigilance so they can still swing out if you need them to. Jake, I think you had briefly mentioned doing some Oath of Druids type shenanigans with this thing.
Yeah, I mentioned maybe putting it into an old deck that I used to have. I had a 5-color Reanimator deck that also used Oath of Druids and Show and Tell. It was just a dumb deck of cheating big fatties into play, and that's what this does on the backside. So I was like, hey, maybe that would be a good way to reinvigorate that deck if I ever chose to. It does kind of fall into the polymorph line. There's been a couple decks out there that only run one creature, and then you play a token maker or your commander and then polymorph it into that one creature, and you're guaranteed to get it, and you can build some kind of combo based off of that. So this would allow you to do the same thing, but have access to all 5 colors, which would be kind of nice.
The other thing that I've seen along those same lines is using the other side of it, the enchantment side, because having access to all 5 colors worth of enchantments and then using a similar polymorph effect, in this case Reality Shift, lets you go and get whatever bonkers broken enchantment you want out of your library and pop it into play, as long as it is your only enchantment. But once you're in 5 colors, getting those cards, really all you're doing is cheating on the mana cost of it.
Pretty much.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know. It looks interesting, but I have to say I'm kind of with Alex. The green gods are probably the least interesting of the bunch for me so far. Red is where it's at for me this time.
In design space, they're all trying to do something interesting. They're just not anything that particularly interests me.
That's a great way to summarize some of these. Summarize a lot of these. I think this is probably the most ambitious design space they've given the gods so far. They're very varied, they're unique, they're interesting. I was always a little disappointed that the original Theros gods, I couldn't have their cool equipment come with them. I'd have to actually dig it out of the library. But this kind of solves the problem. We get their signature weapon, or their pet, or the thing they're most associated with, or their Tybalt. It's just really cool. So Alex, let me ask you then, since we kind of started this out with the question of whether or not these fit the fantasy of a god, how do these compare, you think, to Theros, the original Theros gods, in terms of that fantasy of the gods?
I think they're getting closer with the gods existing in this universe, this world, and they obviously have an impact on the realm of Kaldheim. But they're with them. They're a part of this world. Kind of just like, hey, they've got the same mythos spanning that Theros god did, but they're also present in their lives, like the Amonkhet gods. And then say, hey, these gods can fall, which is a big theme of the North mythology as well. And then they've got these crazy artifacts that come with them, like Thor's hammer, like Thor's hammer, and things like that. So it definitely feels like they're trying to weave more of like, hey, it's not these gods that exist on high and occasionally come down. They're trying to work these gods more into the everyday life that is North mythology. Like, hey, hey Odin, we're going to this battlefield. Make sure that you watch. And then it's like, oh yeah, cool. I'm gonna watch with you, turn into a bird, fly around and watch things. So it's definitely a lot going on with that, and that's not even touching on the larger story of Kaldheim, which we haven't even actually touched on here. But there's a lot going on with the gods, and it definitely feels a bit more to theme with what they're trying to do.
What do you think, Jake?
I think I like the design on a lot of them. Like you guys mentioned, it's interesting space, even if I'm not looking to play some of them. And then I always like it when Black gets new toys. So, hey.
Everybody wins.
We might actually have a good Tybalt. This will be interesting. Will the curse finally end?
The last Tybalt wasn't terrible. He was actually playable and did reasonable things for his cost. But no, this is much better than 2-mana Tybalt with a bullet. Well, I think that about wraps up our grand tour of the multiverse and all the various gods that we've seen throughout the history of Magic. Before we bring this episode to a close, though, Alex, you promised us a hot seat.
I'm actually interested in this one because it fits more of just the whole nerd lore side of this. I'm curious to see what your guys' answers are. One of the spoiled cards for Kaldheim is a card called Tyrite Sanctum. It is a land card. It's got multiple abilities. The first is just tap for colorless. Great. The second is 2, tap. Target legendary creature becomes a god, in addition to its other types. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. And its second activated ability is 4, sacrifice Tyrite Sanctum. Put an indestructible counter on target god. So my question is, with this +2 ability, target creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. What creature through Magic's history is worthy of godhood?
Ooh, that is a good question. Give me a minute here. Jake, if you have anything, you go ahead.
I'll think.
So in terms of mythology, I will go ahead and just say outright, basically any of the old, like, pre-mending planeswalkers are essentially gods, and probably more than gods, and especially how gods have been represented in Magic so far. Apart from those pre-mending planeswalkers, though, I think I'm just going to go with good old-fashioned Titiana, the protector of Argoth. She essentially was a god in the Forest of Argoth. She was represented on a creature card where she punished other players when lands went into your graveyard by making 5/3 elemental tokens. And honestly, I kind of feel like the multiverse owes her one for her whole home getting wrecked, her people being destroyed, because Urza and Mishra just couldn't stop their slap fight for 5 minutes.
Yeah, Urza's responsible for a lot of stuff. So for mine, this card actually has not actually appeared as themselves, aside from as a token, throughout Magic. And they technically exist as an avatar, but for full godhood, and as a card themselves, I would like to see Merit Lage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would be a pretty cool one.
That would be extremely cool. Good call. What about you, Jake? What do you think?
So I don't know if he was ever technically a god, but Yawgmoth was really close at a couple points. I think he should just go ahead and get the bump and go all the way. He had his own...
The father of machines.
Yeah, he had like his whole own plane and everything going on. He should be able to get that title promotion.
I can't argue with that. I think Yawgmoth, he's put in the time. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of years was he running Phyrexia? And let's face it, he did a bang-up job. That place was a real mess before he got there.
He certainly completed it.
And I think a good runner-up would be Tetsuo Umezawa.
Yeah, so Tetsuo Umezawa's got one of... That whole line has just like the most confusing and most bizarre history in all of Magic. So they started out on Kawagama before like the whole Magic story happened. Then he caught a ride with, what was it, the Black Kami over to Dominaria, where he founded the Umezawa bloodline, who were initially responsible for binding and trapping Nicol Bolas. And we most recently saw his youngest descendant from Dominaria, where I believe that was the one that made creatures with power toughness 1 unblockable, right?
Yep.
Getting all this right?
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be worthy of godhood. I mean, it gave us the godly artifact that is Umezawa's Jite. So.
Yeah, that's also true.
Maybe we can get a Corona True God as compared to Corona False God.
Ooh, that's what I should have said. Corona would have been a really good answer. Well, before we go on recounting the entire lore history of Magic the Gathering, because we are not a lore podcast, Alex.
Yeah, just a little bit here. It's a sprinkle of lore.
Why don't we call this episode to a close? We have another episode coming up soon where we're going to have to talk about what's in our cart. Now that we've gone over a few of the gods, we should have probably a little bit shorter of a list to talk about this time. Until then, if there's any cards or any gods you want to tell us about, any decks you have made, be sure to add us on Twitter, send us an email, or go ahead and post a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Until we come back to let you know what's in our cart, I'm John.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Jake.
You can reach the crew from Gemstone Mine on Twitter at GemstoneMineMTG, or send us an email at gemstoneminepodcast@gmail.com. On YouTube, we're Gemstone Mine Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.